Welcome to the Pregnancy Help Podcast. This special episode features an interview between Heartbeat International's Vice President of Communications and Marketing, Andrea Trudden, and Margaret Hartshorn, although many of you know her as Peggy. Peggy is the former President and Chairwoman of Heartbeat International. Together, they will explore Peggy's remarkable 50-year legacy in the pregnancy help movement and reflect on the powerful contrast between two Margarets, one who promoted ending life and one who dedicated her life to protecting it. To those who work, volunteer, or support the pro-life pregnancy help movement, we want to say thank you. We hope and pray that your efforts are blessed, and if Heartbeat International can help in any way, we would love to hear from you. Click the button in the show notes to contact us with your prayer requests or questions.
Well, Peggy, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about your legacy, your lifetime in this movement. And it's not over yet by any stretch, but we're taking some time today because we have, thanks to inspiration from our colleague, Mary Baker, we started diving into what we call the tale of two Margarets. And it sparked a whole thing within Heartbeat where we were diving into history and really seeing the vast difference between Margaret Sanger, founder of Planned Parenthood, and Margaret Hartshorn, Peggy. And so I want to thank you for indulging me in this conversation today.
Oh, sounds fun.
Oh, yeah. Well, I want to actually, before we dive deep into that, I kind of want to hear from you directly as to your life's mission has been very immersed in the pro-life movement. Mm-hmm. How did that come to be?
Well, as I was thinking, I think I even mentioned to you before we started, I was raised in a family and in a community, church community, raised as a Catholic, went to Catholic schools, had all my friends were from intact families and we felt that our family was deprived. We only had 4 children in our family. My 3 siblings, although my mother had 2 other pregnancies, and so she had some pregnancy loss too. But I had friends who were from families of 8, 10, 12. And to me and to our friends, that was really positive. Everyone was excited when a new baby was going to be born, when a mother was pregnant, and it was a very pro-life atmosphere. And so that was, and I was raised also with very strong faith, knowledge that we were all created in the image and likeness of God. That was part of just something that was very clear and basic, in our knowledge of why did God make us? Why did He made us to show forth His goodness, and we're part of that goodness that He's showing forth. So that was how I was raised, and all of a sudden, kind of coming of age, you might say, in the 60s, as I did, I was confronted with a whole other way of looking at marriage, mm-hmm. family, children, babies, and because it was foreign, it was another worldview, and I knew it was wrong. Right. And so I immediately responded to that. And, God just opened doors and gave my husband and I, we were married right after college, in the late 60s, and gave both of us, he was raised in the same atmosphere that I was. We were from the same school, same hometown, so forth and so on. So it gave us, God opened doors almost immediately early on in our marriage. And then Roe v. Wade occurred in 1973. Mm-hmm. And so there it was. And we couldn't believe that this new and ungodly worldview, all of a sudden was presented as desirable. And so the immediate reaction was, well, what can we do about that? How can we help change this atmosphere? I can remember right after Roe v. Wade, my immediate first thought was, how could this be happening in our country? Right. Because as a school kid, we memorized lots of things. And one of them was, the preamble to the Constitution, part of the Declaration of Independence. We knew that in our country, at least, supposedly, we had an inalienable right to life. We were endowed by our Creator. And so all of that it was just, well, this can't be happening in our country. In fact, one of the early leaders of the pro-life movement in Columbus, Ohio, where Mike and I were living at that time and still do live in Columbus, Ohio, it affected their patriotism even to this country. That was a little bit, took a while for me to understand that. But that reaction was they were savvy enough to realize that behind this decision, behind this shocking event in my worldview, it had been prepared for a long time. And it was in many ways orchestrated politically and legislatively and in the judicial system in the U.S. And so, it shouldn't have been such a shock to me. But the fact that it is what motivated my husband and me so strongly to say, what can we do? This can't be happening. And then, of course, we realized it wasn't just a temporary political mistake or legislative, mistake. It really was a deep-seated, effort to change our religious perspective. We see the fruits of it today, how many years later, where now we're faced with such attacks on our Christian views. It's almost unbelievable that we're at this situation, but God's people have rallied, right?
Yes, they have.
A lot more people than immediately after 1973 are part of this movement to really recapture who America is as a country and what the deep God-given worldview, God-given perspective, the dignity of the human person, that we still have in our history of our country, that is, of course, the essence, of our Christian worldview. Obviously, part of our worldview is that we're sinful. What have we allowed to happen? What is at the root, the sinfulness that's at the root of this whole anti-life movement? But God gave us His Son to redeem us. So there's hope. There's always hope for those who have gotten sucked into this worldview, into this culture. As we were talking about Margaret Sanger, one of the thoughts that I shared with you even personally was, isn't it sad that there was nobody in her life, or that she didn't respond if there was,
right, to
people who were trying to help her understand the truth, God-given truth. She didn't have that as far as we know. So anyway, yes, I think that's a long answer to your question of how did we get to this point of Mike and I and just immersing ourselves in the totally opposite worldview of Planned Parenthood and Margaret Sanger.
So you mentioned that, how did we get to the world where Roe v. Wade was passed and accepted? And then growing up, you mentioned that the foundational elements had been happening for a while. And Absolutely. Even in your book, you mentioned kind of being that frog in the water where it's just boiling around you, but you don't even realize it until it's too far and then you're gone. Right. So we kind of saw that as a nation. And unfortunately, but a point of reference for this conversation is Margaret Sanger was very integral in that.
Absolutely. And so changing that worldview, yes.
And shifting it and laying all of that groundwork and focusing on autonomy and justice and all of these things. However, hidden in that, we know that there's a lot of darkness with eugenics and with weeding out people that she deemed unfit. And there was a group of people who did truly believe this.
Right.
And so I want to ask you a little bit about the worldviews, because there are clearly two very different ones in the pro-life camp and then the abortion camp. And so I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Right. Really, when we think about Margaret Sanger, we usually think about her in terms of women's reproductive rights, the term now used, women's reproductive rights, because her effort started with what we call what she called the Birth Control League in 1921, I believe it was. And so her focus initially was on what I consider somewhat limited in terms of questioning our dignity as human persons, our our personhood, our made in the image and likeness of God, of course. She focused on contraceptives, with the idea that this would free women. All right. They would have more control of themselves and their bodies. Of course, interwoven with that was, as we see in her personal life, that marriage was not a vocation that she devoted herself to, although she was married for a while, did have 3 children. But later, as she progressed in this career, she started writing articles in the same periodicals that the eugenicists in Europe were writing in as well. This was all leading up to the eugenics movement, which was at the root of Hitler's theory that he had to purify the human race. That actually was an idea being developed by many scientists, philosophers of those days. And Margaret Sanger was one of them. She wrote in those same journals. I think I brought actually one of the quotations that she's famous for in that whole eugenics arena: the gradual suppression, elimination, and eventual extinction of defective stocks, those human weeds which threaten the blooming of the finest flowers of American civilization. This was part of what she believed. So she went from what I think is somewhat of a limited perspective that you could focus on in terms of the dignity of women and the dignity of the unborn child. She's now expanding that into really a philosophy that focuses on purifying races. She has a horrible quote.
And this is widely known.
Oh, yeah, yeah. You can find these quotes very easily. I did. I'm thinking, I don't want to misquote.
Right.
But yes, her perspective expanded, I would say. And she was a real part of the eugenics movement and that have focused so much on Europe and the United States. And, when I got into the movement, I mentioned again, it was in the 60s and the 70s, as soon as Roe v. Wade came down. The population control people were still very, very influential.
Yeah.
And that was something we had to respond to, in the pro-life movement very early on, that people are not the problem. People are the solution to the problems. We don't solve problems by killing people or eliminating certain races or human weeds. We solve problems in a much different way with our worldview, of course, which is God-centered or Christ-centered. Yes, very, very different. We try to focus on the dignity of every human person, and then the idea of surrounding that person with the kind of love and support that's going to help them flower, whoever God has created them to be. I think how God always in our lives gives us, he orchestrates, as we know, our whole lives. But Mike and I had already so committed ourselves to that each unborn child has such a dignity and so many gifts that God has given him or her. And it's our role to help develop that child's gifts and allow them to develop. And so we ended up having an infertility problem, and we adopted two babies, Tim born in 76, Katie born in 79. And it was so wonderful to go into that already realizing, who are these babies here that God has created? What are their gifts? We want to really be so tuned in to see who they are. And it's somewhat of an advantage when you're an adoptive parent, because you're not expecting the child to be just like you. So I
have 3 children, and a couple of them are nothing like me yet. They're still growing.
Isn't it fun to see
how God is making
this person, that God has created? So anyway, yeah.
Well, and it is so, you keep saying the word dignity, and I feel that has been a part of all of the things that you have, you've developed the love approach, and then of course have been a part of Heartbeat, and we're not letting you go.
Thank you.
For decades.
God's not letting me go.
Keep pulling you back in. But everything that you have taught me and have taught in this movement is all about love and dignity and recognizing that in people, where it is such a contrast to viewing people as problems, needing to be weeded out, or finding a solution, which of course was a horrific eugenics term as well. And so,
yes, the final solution.
Right. Having been in the movement for so long and seeing the two sides, how do you see the culture today?
That's a tough question. Because, it's interesting. Sometimes I've said I'm an eternal optimist, but in reality, and I am the optimist because I'm a Christian. I have hope. I know that God's graces are surrounding us. I know that he's bringing so many people into the movement, and so many people into the movement now who have been wounded and have experienced that other worldview and have been used. By the way, Margaret Sanger's original idea of contraceptives for women has objectified women and their sexuality. They become sex objects.
It was such a lie.
Yeah, it was such a lie that this would free them up, that this would help them in many ways. It's made them sex objects, and so many women believe that, unfortunately, and have adopted that as their own view of themselves. So that has been much more pervasive than I would have ever hoped it is in our culture. And now with the internet influencers, we need influencers. Maybe you could be an influencer. Are you an influencer?
I think I might be too old almost.
But, I see that in this present era, the culture provides way too many more negative influences that I would like to see. Yeah. I was hoping when we started into this 50 years ago, more than 50 years ago, that we could recapture some of the family-oriented culture and the culture that I grew up in. And there are many families trying to live that now. Right. That is beautiful. It is beautiful. I would have hoped that it would have been more.
Right.
But I know now that we're challenged in our movement to use the same tools, meaning the technology, the internet, social media, the influencers, AI now. We have to take advantage of the tools that are available to spread the good news. We have to do it. And so I'm hopeful. I wish we were starting from even a more positive place. But I know God is in charge. And I know that there are people like me who are, and like you, Andrea, I know how you were raised too, with the kind of worldview that we feel called to really share. And, so it doesn't affect my motivation. That's for sure. We need to we are working with different tools. We're working just as hard. And even harder.
Well, and I think the good news is that it took us a long time to get where we are today, utilizing the web and seeing how dark some places can be and how far some people will go to either justify their rationale, their worldview, or they are so wounded that they just sling insults and have no argument for their cause and for why they are so pro-abortion.
Right.
But what we have seen already this year is just a really big movement in studies, which is great. People moving back toward traditional marriage. And I believe it's for the first time in the past several years, divorce rates have gone down and marriage rates have increased. So people are seeing the benefit of that traditional family.
Right.
They're seeing the desire, like the good aspects of it, a mother and a father in a home, and just embracing one another. And so that is an encouragement. I know that it took us a long time to get here, and we definitely had to get far down. But hopefully we are starting to see that pendulum swing back.
Exactly. And the line now is so clear.
Yes.
The line is so clear. When I was growing up in the 50s and early 60s, we just kind of assumed we had a Judeo-Christian culture that we didn't recognize what was under that was moving to the top. And now it's so clear. The line is so clear. It reminds me of one of the Bible verses that I love the most. I have it in two different places in our home is choose whom you shall serve. Me and my household, we will serve the Lord. So, we will serve the Lord. And so now that choice is very clear. I set before you life and death. As for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. So, it is so clear now. And I'm so thankful for the wonderful ministries, organizations, nonprofits, Heartbeat International, all of our pregnancy centers that are around this country and around the world. I think we're aren't we in almost 100 countries now?
We're over 100 countries,
over 100
nearly
countries.
4,000 locations.
Unbelievable. I mean, that is such an example of God's work. And he hasn't given up on us.
No. Not even.
He keeps giving us chances, right? He keeps giving us opportunities to turn back to the Lord. And I've been, in fact, listening again to the Bible in a Year broadcast. And I know there are various versions, but getting through the Old Testament, takes a while, doesn't it?
A little bit.
But how many times God's people rebelled? How many times I'm almost overwhelmed by the examples of rejection of God's prophets and of God's forgiveness. Or if he gave them, then they go back.
Yep.
They
saw the miracles
the false gods. And we've got so many false gods in our culture, in our world today. Mm-hmm. But God keeps forgiving. He keeps giving us another chance. So I know that's what he's doing. And it's wonderful to be part of his calling, to jump out of that boiling water and come back to the Lord. Yeah.
Well, and it is important to have people to look at their lives and to compare yourselves or see how they lived and have those samples throughout history.
Oh, yeah.
Where we can look at, well, what went wrong? What was this worldview and why did it matter at that time and how did it create a culture? Exactly. And people like Margaret Sanger, she was pivotal in this movement for abortion, but we're so grateful that there are people like Peggy Hartshorn, who is a good example to look at and just see time and again, just through your genuine, attitude, personality, the kindness in your eyes, the desire to teach and educate, seeing all of those attributes in that outflow to a movement as well, to help see the difference. Because when it's on paper and you're comparing Margaret Sanger, Margaret Hartshorn, and the movements and all of the things, There's so clear.
Parallels.
There are some parallels, absolutely.
Yeah.
But it is fascinating to see the autonomy and rights versus dignity and love, and how they have both impacted an entire movement.
Thank you. And the dignity and love is so much more empowering for women, for children, for families. That's where the real power is, so we're tapping into God's graces and God's power.
Oh, well, thank you so much for taking time today to talk about this comparison, this interesting juxtaposition that I'm glad that we did get to dive in. We were going to have some different writings about it and sending it out. But just thank you for the time and for your legacy that you've been able to place within a movement. I know that you've touched so many lives, not just here at Heartbeat, but around the world. Mm-hmm. I love the fact that the love approach is used worldwide. I'm not even going to name a number of countries because I will get it wrong. And I know that Ellen, our international specialist, is taking it now to new countries.
Yeah.
So it's something.
I know she is. But that's what love is, love is not limited to any particular person, place, time, because God is love and he's everywhere. So thank you for that. That's beautiful.
Be sure to subscribe to the Pregnancy Help Podcast for more news and encouragement for the pro-life community. Thanks for listening.